Daniel Cross had built his life on the belief that everything could be predicted, shaped, and perfected. Numbers didn't lie, systems didn't fail, at least, not under his watch. His name was printed on the skyscraper's highest point. His face had been on magazine covers, and his strategies were studied in business schools. People admired him for his discipline, envied his success, and feared his precision. He wasn't the kind of man who stumbled into the unexpected. But that night, something happened that wasn't on his calendar. The meeting had run hours longer than planned, ending with a handshake that was more exhausting than satisfying. His personal elevator, the one that kept him away from the chaos of the lower floors, was out of order. He was forced to take the narrow, dimly lit corridor that twisted behind the tower's main lobby. It was a part of the building he had never walked before, the kind of space meant for staff who kept the place spotless while executives like him were already home. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. A mop bucket sat to the side, wheels squeaking when the faint draft nudged it. He was already halfway down the hallway when he noticed her, a small figure, maybe 8 or 9 years old, kneeling on the stone floor with a frayed cloth in her hand. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, a little uneven as though it had been trimmed at home. She wore a faded sweatshirt that hung loosely on her shoulders, and a pair of gloves clearly meant for adult hands. She was scrubbing the floor with a focus that made her look far older than she was. Daniel stopped mid-step, his polished shoes silent against the floor now. She didn't notice him at first. She was too busy working at a stain that probably no one else would have cared about. When she finally looked up, there was no fear in her expression, only a quiet, steady gaze that caught him off guard. "What are you doing here?" His voice came out sharper than he intended. "I'm cleaning," she replied simply, as though the answer should have been obvious. Her voice was calm, but her breathing was quick, her hands still clutching the cloth tightly. "It's the middle of the night," he said, more to himself than to her. She hesitated, then spoke again. "My mom's supposed to be here, but she's sick. If she misses too many shifts, they might replace her. So, I'm doing it instead." The hallway suddenly felt colder. Daniel had dealt with employees all of his life, thousands of names on payroll sheets, countless faces at annual events, but this was different. This wasn't a story in a memo. This was a child, alone, doing work she should never have to do. He wanted to say something, ask where her father was, ask why she wasn't home, but his words stuck somewhere between disbelief and a strange, unwelcome pull in his chest. "What's your name?" he asked at last. "Emma," she said, standing slowly as if unsure whether she should leave or stay. In that moment, Daniel Cross realized something he hadn't in years. Not everything in life could be predicted. And sometimes the smallest, most ordinary scene could tear a hole straight through the armor you'd spent your whole life building. Emma didn't speak again right away, and Daniel found himself oddly unsure of what to do next. Normally, he knew exactly how to handle any situation, how to negotiate a deal, dismiss an employee, or close a contract in minutes. But here, in the dim service corridor with a child holding a worn rag, his well-rehearsed confidence didn't seem to apply. She knelt again, returning to her work as if the conversation hadn't happened. The slow, circular motion of the rag against the marble was strangely hypnotic, and for a moment, he just stood there watching her. Her tiny hands pushed the fabric with determination, but he could see the fatigue in the way her shoulders sagged. "Where's your mother right now?" he asked finally. "At home. She's got a fever," Emma said without looking up. "She told me not to come, but if she misses too many shifts, they'll take her name off the schedule. That's what happened to Mrs. Alvarez, and then she couldn't pay rent." Her words were too heavy for her age, as though she'd been carrying adult fears for a long time. Daniel felt an uncomfortable twist in his stomach. The reality she spoke of was so far from his own that he almost didn't know how to process it. "You shouldn't be here," he said, softer this time. She paused and glanced at him, her expression calm but unyielding. "I shouldn't have to be, but nobody else is going to clean this floor." The simplicity of her reply hit harder than any argument could. She turned back to her task, wringing the rag in a bucket that looked far too heavy for her to lift. He crouched down, reaching for the bucket before she could strain herself. "I'll take that," he said. She frowned slightly. "You don't have to help me. You're important." Daniel almost laughed, though there was nothing funny about the moment. "Being important doesn't mean I can't carry a bucket." She studied him for a second longer, as though trying to decide if she could trust this stranger in an expensive suit. Then she let go. The bucket was heavier than he expected, and the sharp scent of disinfectant stung his nose. "Do you work for the company?" he asked as they moved toward the next stretch of hallway. "My mom does. She's been here for 2 years. She says it's better than her last job because it's clean and safe. But the pay's not much, so she sometimes takes extra hours." Emma hesitated, then added, "She doesn't like asking for help, that." Daniel understood all too well. He'd built an entire empire on the belief that asking for help was weakness. But seeing this child here, replacing her mother for the night, made him wonder if maybe he'd misunderstood strength all along. They reached the next section of marble, and Emma knelt again. This time, Daniel didn't just watch. He knelt beside her. She glanced at him, surprise flickering in her eyes, but said nothing. For the first time in years, Daniel Cross was doing something that had no strategic value, no financial gain, no measurable return. And somehow, it felt more real than any boardroom victory he'd ever had. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet guess, was that this small act of curiosity would pull him into a story far deeper, far more life-altering than he could possibly imagine. Daniel didn't return to his penthouse apartment that night as quickly as he had planned. Something about walking away from the small figure on the marble floor felt wrong, as though leaving would mean closing the door on a truth he wasn't ready to ignore. Emma kept working with a quiet focus, moving the rag in deliberate circles. The sound of it dragging across the stone seemed louder than the faint hum of the air vents above them. She wasn't rushing, yet she wasn't slow either, just steady, like someone who knew she couldn't stop until the job was done. "Does your mom know you're here?" he asked. "She thinks I'm at a neighbor's house," Emma admitted without looking at him. "I'll get in trouble if she finds out, but I don't want her to lose her job." Daniel leaned against the wall, studying her. The determination in her voice didn't match her size, and it unsettled him. He'd met top executives who buckled under far less pressure than this child seemed to handle. Without complaint, "What's your mom's name?" he asked. "Carla." Her answer was short, but there was warmth in the way she said it, pride even. He filed the name away. He could have walked upstairs, pulled up her file in the HR system, and found out everything about her within minutes. But in that moment, he didn't want data. He wanted to hear Emma's version. "She works hard," Emma added after a pause. "She never complains, even when she's tired. Sometimes she sings while she cleans. She's really good, too." A faint smile tugged at her lips, then disappeared just as quickly. Daniel had no idea why that detail made something tighten in his chest. He was used to seeing work as numbers, tasks completed, hours billed, profits made. But hearing a child describe her mother's late-night cleaning shifts in the same tone, someone might talk about a treasured memory. It was different. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight. "How do you get home?" "I walk." She said it as though it were nothing unusual. "Alone?" She hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. The image made his jaw tighten. The city was not kind to the vulnerable after dark, and yet here she was, scrubbing floors in the heart of the financial district, planning to walk home in the cold hours of the night. He crouched beside her again. "When you're finished here, I'll make sure you get home safely." Emma looked at him for a long moment, weighing his words. "Why?" she asked finally. Daniel wasn't used to being questioned like that. People accepted his decisions without hesitation, but Emma seemed to want proof. "Because no one should be walking alone at this hour," he said simply. She gave the smallest nod, as though she'd decided that was enough. Then she dipped her rag into the bucket again, returning to the floor. What Daniel didn't tell her was that he wasn't offering because of company policy or some moral obligation. He was offering because something in this quiet, determined child reminded him of a part of himself he'd buried a long time ago. The part that had once known what it meant to fight for something that mattered. And deep down, he had the uneasy sense that meeting Emma was not a coincidence at all. By the time Emma finished the last stretch of the hallway, the building was almost silent. The kind of stillness that made every sound sharper, the soft drip from a mop handle, the faint buzz of the lights overhead, even the distant rumble of traffic far below. Daniel carried the bucket while Emma wrung out her rag one final time. She stood up slowly, stretching her small shoulders as though she'd been carrying a weight twice her size all evening. He realized she probably had. "Where's your coat?" he asked. She pointed toward a janitor's closet at the end of the hall. Inside, hanging from a bent metal hook, was a thin jacket that looked more suited for early autumn than the freezing night outside. He frowned but didn't comment. Instead, he reached into his own overcoat pocket and pulled out a wool scarf. "Here," he said, holding it out. Emma shook her head. "It's yours. It'll keep you warm," he replied. "I can get another one, but you can't get another." She hesitated for a moment, then took it, wrapping it clumsily round her neck. Something about the way she accepted it grateful, but without the awkwardness adults often had made him certain she was used to small kindnesses. Being rare, they walked together toward the service exit, and Daniel noticed her pace quicken as they neared the street. He opened the heavy metal door, and the cold hit them instantly. The street lamps cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and a gust of wind tugged at Emma's jacket. "Which way?" he asked. "To Blocks that way, then left," she said, pointing toward a row of narrow streets where the glow of the city softened into darker corners. Halfway there, they passed a small convenience store. Emma slowed, looking at the display of bread and milk in the window. Daniel stopped to, "Do you need something?" She shook her head. "No, we're fine." But her voice wavered, and her eyes lingered a little too long on the food. He didn't press her, at least not yet. They continued down the block until they reached an aging apartment building with peeling paint and a flickering light above the door. Emma fished out a key from her pocket and pushed the door open. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of cooking and damp wood. She led him up a narrow staircase to the second floor. A door opened before they reached it. A woman stood there, mid-30s, pale from illness but with strikingly clear eyes. She wore a worn sweater and clutched a blanket around her shoulders. When she saw Daniel, her expression shifted instantly to suspicion. "Emma, who is this?" Her voice was soft but edged with protectiveness. "He's from the building," Emma explained. "He helped me finish." Daniel noticed the faint tremor in the woman's hands. She was clearly unwell, but she straightened her posture as though determined not to look weak. "I appreciate the help," she said carefully, "but you shouldn't have had to walk her here." Daniel could have left it at that, offered a polite goodbye and stepped away. But something in her tone, in the quiet dignity she carried even in this modest hallway, made him pause. "I think we should talk," he said, "not as an employer, an employee, but as people." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she opened the door wider, just enough for him to see the small, tidy apartment behind her. And in that instant, Daniel knew this was where the story truly began. Daniel stepped into the apartment, and the first thing he noticed was how clean it was, spotless. In fact, despite its worn furniture and peeling paint, the air smelled faintly of soap and chamomile tea, a sharp contrast to the cold street outside. It wasn't luxury, but every corner seemed cared for, as if someone had fought to keep it in order despite the odds. Emma quickly slipped off her jacket and hung it on a wooden peg by the door. The woman Carla motioned for Daniel to sit on a faded couch. She stayed standing, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "I'm sorry if Emma caused any trouble," Carla began, her voice steady but tired. "She shouldn't have been at the building. I told her to stay with the neighbor." But she glanced at her daughter with a mix of frustration and pride. "She was worried about you," Daniel said. Carla's lips pressed together. "I know, but she's a child. She shouldn't be worrying about things like shifts and schedules." Emma slipped into the small kitchen, the sound of a cupboard door opening echoing faintly. Daniel could see a half-empty loaf of bread on the counter, and a jar of tea leaves next to it. "I didn't know she was there until I saw her working," Daniel admitted. "At first, I thought maybe she was just passing through, but then she told me she was taking your place so you wouldn't lose your job." Carla's eyes softened for just a moment before she looked away. "She's smart, too smart, sometimes. She understands more than I wish she did." "May I ask?" Daniel hesitated, unsure how personal he should get. What happened? Why are you working nights? Carla leaned against the wall, the blanket slipping slightly from her shoulder. Because I have to. Daytime jobs require a degree or experience I don't have. Nights let me be here for her after school. It's not easy, but it's what I can manage. And for the most part, it works, until I got sick this week. The simplicity in her explanation carried more weight than a long speech could have. Daniel found himself wanting to know more, not because it was his responsibility as her employer, but because there was a quiet strength in her words that unsettled him. You don't have family nearby? He asked. Double quotes. No, just us, she said, glancing toward the kitchen. We had help once, but it didn't last. People mean well until they have to give up something for you. Then they disappear. Emma returned, carrying 3 mismatched mugs of tea. She set one down in front of Daniel with both hands, careful not to spill. Thank you, he said, taking it. The girl sat beside her mother, close enough that their shoulders touched. Carla rested a hand on her daughter's head for just a moment, her expression softening in a way that told Daniel everything he needed to know about their bond. He could have left then. In fact, that was the logical thing to do. But instead, he took a slow sip of tea and said, you know, there are some things that shouldn't be left to chance, and I don't think what happened tonight should happen again. Carla studied him, unsure of where he was going. Meaning, he said, I want to make sure Emma is never in a position where she feels she has to take your place at work, and I have a few ideas on how to make that happen. Neither of them spoke right away, but Daniel could feel the air shift in the room, like a door had opened, and no one yet knew what was on the other side. What he didn't tell them was that this wasn't charity. This was the beginning of a promise he had no intention of breaking. Carla didn't answer right away. Her eyes shifted between Daniel and Emma, as if trying to read his intentions before letting him any further into their lives. Daniel understood. That look, he'd seen it in people who had learned the hard way. That help often came with strings attached. I'm not here to take anything from you, he said calmly, and I'm not here to make decisions for you. But I saw your daughter tonight, doing something no child should have to do, and I can't unsee it. I don't want this to happen again. Emma sat up straighter, her small hands cupped around the tea mug. What do you mean? She asked. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I mean that you should be home at night with your mother, not cleaning floors in a skyscraper. Carla's jaw tightened. That's a nice idea, but life doesn't work that way. We can't just wish things to be different. I'm not talking about wishes, Daniel replied. I'm talking about a plan. Carla crossed her arms, skeptical. And what kind of plan would that be? He thought for a moment, measuring his words. First, I want to make sure your income is secure, even if you're sick. Second, I want to help you transition into a role during the day, one that pays better and doesn't keep you away from Emma at night. I can make that happen. Carla let out a short, almost bitter laugh. Why would you do that? You don't even know us. Daniel didn't have a simple answer. He could have said it was because he respected hard work, or because he didn't like seeing potential wasted. But the truth was more complicated. It had been years since something broke through the walls he'd built, and Emma's determination had done it in minutes. Let's just say, he said finally, I know what it's like to grow up feeling like no one is looking out for you, and I'm in a position to change that for you and for her. Emma's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, though it seemed cautious, as if she'd learned not to hold onto it too quickly. Carla was quiet for a long time. The ticking of a clock somewhere in the apartment seemed louder than before. Then, finally, she spoke. I'm not asking for favors. If I do this, it's because I earn it. Good, Daniel said with a faint smile. Because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering opportunity. You work for it, you keep it. Something in the way he said it must have convinced her, because the suspicion in her eyes softened just a little. She nodded once. All right, we'll hear you out. That night marked the start of something none of them could have predicted. Within weeks, Carla was working in a new position during the day, one that paid enough for her to keep up with bills without the exhausting night shifts. Emma no longer had to wait for her mother to come home in the early hours, and the scarf Daniel had given her stayed by the door, worn on the coldest days like a quiet reminder of how everything had changed. For Daniel, the change was harder to explain. It wasn't about the company, or numbers, or strategy anymore. It was about a small girl in oversized gloves who had reminded him without even trying that life's most important returns couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. And though he never told them, he considered that night not the moment he helped them, but the moment they saved him from forgetting what it meant to care.